Good evening. I'll try that one more time. Welcome to the first in our series on FASD. And this one is addressing FASD 101, Understanding Symptoms and Providing Support. I am Stacia Stribling, the Deputy Director of Form Families Forward, and I'm joined by Kelly Henderson, our Executive Director.
Yeah,
Good
I know.
evening. Really glad you're here. And just a reminder, we are in meeting mode, so please make sure you mute yourself. We would love to see you on camera, but it is not expected. We will hope to have a little time at the end for questions, comments, and we will turn the recording off at that point.
This
So
is you,
if
Kelly.
you, yep, if you are, I'm trying to chat things in and talk, which is just a bad combination. Um, again, Kelly Henderson with Forum Families Forward. If you do not know Forum Families Forward, we are extra glad you're here with us this evening, and hope that you will be joining us for the rest of our Tuesday evenings throughout the month of February. January. We are a family-led nonprofit organization. We serve Northern Virginia foster, adoptive, and kinship families as our primary audience, and many of our families are raising children, youth, and young adults with specialized needs, disabilities, mental health conditions, and obviously the impact of trauma. We do our work at no cost to our families that we serve. We offer training and one-on-one consultations. We have family events. You'll hear about one of those coming up. We have lots and lots of resources, and we do lots and lots of trainings, including these webinars as well as some online classes. Again, you'll hear about shortly. We also are the family partner to the Virginia Tiered Systems of Supports project. So if you're in education or school, you may be familiar with the multi-tiered systems of supports, and we do some work in that space, making sure to elevate the voice of families. On the slide is a reminder for me to tell you here tonight on the 6th of January that if you are listening and participating live and you would like a certificate of attendance, I am going to put in the chat Veronica Ferris's email address. She is our administrative guru, and she will check the records and she will get you the certificate of attendance if you are attending this live. If you're watching this in recording, I'm sorry that is not available. The same applies for the future webinars in this series. Um, sorry, Stacia, do you want to tell about the I'll I'll let people in and I'll chat in the links. How's that?
Perfect. So just a reminder that having signed up for this webinar, you are actually signed up for the remaining three as well. So each Tuesday, so next Tuesday, the 13th, we're going to be joined by Dr. Ali Sturgill, as well as I just heard Dr. Stephanie McNerney is also going to be joining us. They are both from University of Virginia Children's Hospital, and they will be talking about diagnosis, how that goes about, where that is done, what they look for. The following Tuesday, the 20th, is the role of occupational therapy or OT in supporting FASD. We are so thrilled that Dr. Misty Pruner and Dr. Tracy Jerichowicz are going to be joining us. We heard Dr. Misty Pruner talk at the FASD United Impact Week in September. And so she's done some amazing work with OT and FASD. So they'll be joining us. And then the last Tuesday in January, the 27th, will be FASD Virginia, exploring a new resource for families. Kelly and I will be sharing a new hub website that we have just launched the first of this year. And we'll be kind of walking through that and helping people see how you can get some more resources in Virginia around FASD. Another thing we have is our Learning Your Way is our online learning platform, which is free, which is go at your own pace. So you can log in and do courses. We have courses on special education, conflict resolution, other health impairments, trauma. So you are welcomed to register for that. Right now, it's closed. We are doing some updating to the courses and adding some information, and that will be open on February 15th. But you can go ahead and register for that if you'd like, and we can get you in there on the 15th. We do offer certificates if you need them for either for work or for foster care credits, training credits. As we said, we do some family events, and our big one is coming up in April. On April 18th, we are going to be having our annual Spring Forward Foster, Adoptive, and Kinship Family Fun Day. It's going to be at the GMU Science and Tech Campus at Manassas, 8:30 to 2. We have an amazing keynote speaker. We just confirmed Melissa Corkum, who is a fantastic author, and she's an adoptee and an adoptive parent, and has done a lot of work on blocked care and trauma and all of the joys and challenges of parenting kids from hard places. And she's going to be there as our keynote. We've got some great breakout sessions and some programming for youth. So the whole family is invited to this event. We do offer support groups, free support groups, form families together. Tonight, we're joined by Melissa Leveling. She's another staff member, and she runs our support groups. She runs FFT for us. And they meet twice a month. The first Sunday of the month is virtual, and the third Wednesday of each month is in person at our office in Fairfax. And Kelly's dropping links for registering for that. And I think this is finally the last thing we have to share. We're doing a lot. Melissa is also running a big baffling behaviors course. It's going to be an 8-week online course. This is the only one that is not free of charge. Melissa's uses a curriculum by Robin Goebel, and so there is some cost associated with that. But it's an amazing course, and so it kind of helps you understand the brain, how do you deal with big baffling behaviors. You're going to get a book, lots of great resources, and meet weekly to go through that. So Kelly will drop the link for registering for that. All right, that's a lot. That's just what we have going on in the next month. So please do check out our website for everything else. But we wanted to find out, first of all, before we start, what brings you to this webinar? So Kelly just launched a poll. Are you parenting a child with an FASD diagnosis? Parenting a child that you suspect has an FASD, but no formal diagnosis, professional, working with clients or students who are diagnosed or who you suspect are diagnosed, have an FASD, or you don't have any personal experience, you're really just curious. And those poll numbers are coming in. Got about 75 participation so far. We got almost everybody in here.
And you can choose more than one. So some of us have many roles, and we respect and appreciate that. Gosh, we are getting good response. You guys are on fire.
Yes.
All right, we're going to give you 10 more seconds, and then we're going to end the poll so you can see who all's here. All right. And 3, 2, 1. And here we go.
All right, we've got a nice broad range here. So we've got about a quarter of you parenting a child with a diagnosis or suspected with a diagnosis. We've got some professionals here. This is awesome to see. Almost 50% of you are professionals working with folks with an FASD, and a bunch who have no personal experience but are just curious, which I love because we have a lot to share, and there's some great information that can help you as you come across some folks in the world who might baffle you with some of their behavior. This could be a good lens to help you understand.
And we have a couple folks chatting in. I assume maybe the poll wasn't working for them, and one parenting with possible FASD and another parenting with definitely FASD diagnosis. So wonderful. So glad you're here. Whoops. And let me stop sharing. And there we go.
All right. Yes, thank you. And just to let you know a little bit more about us. Both Kelly and I parent children with diagnosis. I actually have two with that diagnosis, and Kelly has one as well. So we bring some parenting experience, and both of us were former educators. So we bring some educator experience to this topic tonight as well. So what are our goals for tonight? We are our top three goals here. Recognize the range of symptoms associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. We want to understand how that exposure and that FASD, resulting FASD, impacts those various brain domains. So we'll go through what those brain domains are and how those are impacted. And then we're going to wrap up with identifying effective strategies that support those with FASD, both at home and in school, so we can think through both of those lenses. So what is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD? It is a lifelong disability, and this definition comes from the Canada FASD Research Network, that affects the brain and body of people who were exposed to alcohol in the womb. So it really is a whole body diagnosis, but it impacts people to different degrees. So each person with this diagnosis has some strengths and some challenges, and they're going to need supports to help them succeed with different parts of their life. There is a saying that if you know one person with an FASD, then you know one person with an FASD, because it is a spectrum disorder. And so it does present quite differently for each individual. Now, if you are a parent who already has a child diagnosed, you recognize that when they do testing, FASD itself is not the diagnosis. So the neuropsych at the end of the day is not going to say FASD. It's going to have one of these other letter combinations, probably. So FASD is just the umbrella under which these specific diagnoses exist. We have fetal alcohol syndrome. This is what was first diagnosed in 1973 and was first identified. That comes with it a lot of facial features. And so that might be the thing that people are most familiar with, because this is how the identification of this disability first came about. But you can also have partial fetal alcohol syndrome. You can have alcohol-related birth defects. As I said, this is a whole body disability, and it impacts all different parts of your system, because it is impacting a fetus that is growing and developing. And so it can have a very wide impact. Alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorders and neurobehavioral disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure, those are actually quite similar. I believe the DSM uses the NDPAE diagnosis. So if you are diagnosed through a neuropsych, that is the diagnosis you would get. And that's the diagnosis both of my children have. And that one is a little more invisible, because you don't necessarily have the facial features associated with that. So you can't look at a child with NDPAE and know just by looking at them that they have an FASD. But when you interact with them for a while, you start to get some clues, and we'll talk about what some of those are. So those facial features that showed up in the initial uncovering of fetal alcohol syndrome are shown here in this picture. So you'll see things like smaller eye sets. They would actually measure the distance between the two eyes. Those epicanthal folds, you'll have a little bit more of a fold over, a very flat nasal bridge. Railroad track ears. So rather than pointing up, they sort of point back a little bit. Upturned nose, cute little small upturned noses were often a feature of this. And this smooth philtrum. So you know how you have a little divot above your lip, that will often not exist. It will be much smoother with a very thin upper lip. And those are some of the facial features that you might see with exposure to alcohol in utero. Now, the interesting thing is less than 10% of children with an FASD will actually exhibit these facial features. So for parents, I know how frustrating that is, because there might be pediatricians that don't really know too much about FASD except for the facial feature piece. And so you may have heard along the way, oh no, they don't look like a child with an FASD. They don't have to look a certain way in order to meet the criteria and have that diagnosis. And in fact, most of them do not. So we often say that FASD is an invisible brain-based condition because there are so many cases where there are no facial features. So all of these children here could very well have an FASD, and you would not know it just looking at them. What is common across all of those different diagnoses under the FASD umbrella is the impact on brain development. So the brain is the organ that is most vulnerable to the prenatal alcohol exposure, and it's affected differently at different stages of development. There are certain charts out there that sort of show there's not an exact science to when things happen, because it's not only when the mother may have consumed alcohol, but there's also factors such as their genetics, how much they drank, what their nutrition was like, did they have prenatal care, how much stress were they under, how old were they, and so all of those factors go into the ways that the alcohol ends up impacting the brain, which is why this is a spectrum disorder. But there are some characteristics that are pretty common. And so they lay them out in primary, secondary, and tertiary characteristics. Primary characteristics, these are the ones that are directly associated with that alcohol exposure. So you may see things like learning disabilities, really poor short-term memory, poor auditory memory and auditory processing. So it looks like kids not listening, but they're actually taking a while to process what you're saying. A lot of impulsivity, so it looks a lot like ADHD. At times, you'll see a lot of those characteristics. They struggle with abstract concepts. Developmental dysmaturity, and dysmaturity is a word that we use a lot in the FASD world that is sometimes new to people. And most people think of the word immaturity. With immaturity, it's the person has the ability to act a certain way and they're choosing not to, or they're just, because of the environment, being a little more immature. Dysmaturity means that they've actually not really developed in that area, that you've got this staggered development across different domains. And so socially, they may actually only be like a 7-year-old, even though they are 15 years old. So that's what we refer to with the dysmaturity. Primary characteristics also include problems with attention, poor judgment. They struggle with natural or logical consequences. So some of the parenting techniques that were used with us, or that we know that are most common, really don't often work with this population. And also they can be described as non-compliant, uncooperative, resistant, manipulative, or unmotivated. And most of those words are used when that behavior is not viewed as a result of the brain damage. When we see that behavior and think, well, they can control this, and they're not. But those are the things directly related to the alcohol exposure. Now, when we don't recognize that they have an FASD, and this is why next week's thing on diagnosis is going to be helpful, because that diagnosis is really important. When we don't know that that is what's going on, and we're still carrying the same expectations for these kids, it can lead to these secondary characteristics. So you start to see more mental health diagnoses, things like depression, anxiety. They become easily frustrated. They get aggressive. So they're not necessarily aggressive by nature. They're aggressive because the world doesn't understand them and they struggle to function in the world. They might become more anxious. They're quick to fatigue. You'll see poor scholastic performance, even though many of them have average to above average IQs. They're not performing well in school. You may see them being overactive or underactive and start to shut down. So those would be some of the secondary characteristics. When we continue to not meet their needs and not accommodate and understand this disability, that's when we begin to see these tertiary characteristics. So these individuals are those that are constantly in trouble. They're more apt to run away from home. They're at great risk and super vulnerable for things like human trafficking, substance abuse, getting involved in gangs, homelessness. And so that's why for us, this mission of having people understand this disability is really important, because the more we know, the more we're able to support and help these kiddos, the less likely they are to develop some of these other issues and long-term characteristics. I'll let you take over, Kelly.
Thanks. That's a lot of characteristics that you just heard, and you can imagine that often they are recognized and called something else. We have a wide vocabulary in our disability service system and our diagnosis of disability and mental health conditions. And so it is not a big surprise that many of our individual children, youth, young adults with FASD were identified with something else or misdiagnosed or undiagnosed for a long, long period of time. We know our latest statistics, and these numbers still hold. We just had them checked this summer at the FASD United um, uh, uh, Awareness Week, where we were meeting with researchers from all around the world. 1 in 20 school-aged children have FASD. In other words, would meet the criteria for FASD, or any one of those types of FASD. So that obviously 5%. But less than 1% are diagnosed with it. So the challenges related to underdiagnosis and misdiagnosis and missed diagnosis are really real. You can also see, next slide, that as Stacia started this conversation, this is a brain-based disability. This is an impact and insult to the brain, to the neurology system. So, because our brain does lots of things, lots of great things for us, when that brain system is impacted so significantly by this prenatal alcohol exposure, lots and lots of systems can sort of go offline, or certainly be impacted in a way that does not help the child's development. And so we're going to talk in more details when we get to the strategies section about strategies in many of these brain domains, but we want to be really clear that this is a comprehensive impact, that it can impact many of our brain-based systems. The one that we see at the very top, and the reason it's listed there, because we do a lot of work with schools and families, negotiating schools and professionals who are in schools. We see academic challenges. And the reason for that is because of these other domain areas. Limited attention span, really have a hard time paying attention in class. Again, we see that also with other diagnoses. Cognitive impact. As Stacia said, many of our individuals with FASD are average or above average cognitive functioning. We do have some individuals with FASD who are in the intellectual disability range or developmental disability range, but in any case, cognition is clearly impacted. The ability to reason, understand complex concepts, language, difficulty understanding. So receptive language tends to be generally, again, not every kid looks the same with an FASD diagnosis, but generally, the receptive language tends to be more impacted than expressive language. We've got lots of good talkers amongst our FASD crew, but receptive language, the ability to understand what is being asked, and then it begins to obviously look like those secondary characteristics of defiance and insubordination and disrespect. Memory, lots and lots of memory issues, selective memories, short and long-term memories. Working memory is a real hardship for many of our kids. The ability to self-regulate our emotions and to plan our actions, organize our thoughts, our feelings, manage our behaviors. Those are both significant impact of FASD. Motor skills, and I don't know that we're going to have a huge conversation tonight about the sort of physical health and overlap with some of the other cognitive and mental health issues, but we are learning a lot more about motor and physical health issues with the FAC population. It gets very wide ranging and sometimes very difficult to diagnose and connect that to the prenatal exposure. Adaptive behavior and social communication. This is the day-to-day living skills. And if you are parenting or you have worked with a child with FASD, you know that this is where we sometimes feel that pinch. Again, they may express themselves very well. They may look, without those facial features, look very typical, but their ability to adaptively respond to the demands of their day are very, very limited sometimes. And then brain structure. Again, we actually see some physical health symptoms like seizures, epilepsy, and then actually, and I think we'll see a slide that sometimes the physical structure of the brain is impacted by this prenatal exposure. Stacia, I'm just going to pause because I do see a question. Do you want to address that?
Yes. Yeah. So the question in the chat was, is alcohol the only substance included in these studies? There it certainly is impact from other drugs, legal and illegal. And the reality is that it's very hard to tease those out because what we see most often is polysubstance use. So if someone is using drugs, marijuana, cocaine, it is highly likely that they are also using alcohol. Those things go hand in hand. So you see a lot, multiple substances. I would say, though, that research bears out that alcohol actually is the most damaging of all of those. Not to say that other drugs don't also have this impact. There certainly are. If it's a teratogen, if it goes straight into bloodstream, then yes, it can have these impacts as well. There are some other groups. This is one of my pet peeves. I'm wondering why people sort of in the drug world and in the alcohol world are doing more to work together. But there is a group, Generation O, on opioid, babies born addicted to opioids. So they do a lot of work, but you see that a lot of the symptoms overlap. But like I said, it's really hard to tease those out. But we do know that alcohol has a huge impact, and we don't often think of it because it is legal. And because people of childbearing age often don't know that they're pregnant until later, right? And so there is definitely a lot of stigma associated with it that we have to work through, because this is not people wanting to harm their children. It's sometimes people not realizing that they have a child growing that hadn't planned on it. So these are makes it even more challenging. And I think what makes those numbers pretty high, the 1 in 20, pretty high.
Yeah. Thank you. And feel free to keep the questions in the chat. We do hope to move to some question and answer towards the end. So we love talking about the what is, just to help folks become more familiar, but we want to move quickly, and we're at our 7:30 mark. So we want to move quickly into what can we do, because that is equally, if not more important, as you are parenting or supporting children, youth, and young adults with this condition. So we're going to talk about modifications briefly in 3 areas. Modifications to the environment. These are things that we as adults, caring adults, can manipulate, can do something about. And the environment is one of those. We can make changes in the settings in which these children are living. Supervision. And this is so critically important. Again, Stacia talked about that dysmaturity concept, the idea that children with FASD are not maturing, not developing at the same rate that we would expect a typically or non-impacted child to develop. And so the things that we would expect to have to do for a 3-year-old are things that we should be expecting to have to do for a 6 or 7 or 8 or 10-year-old. And that includes supervision, is really knowing and being very intricately involved in oversight of the child to keep them safe. And again, even when it is age inappropriate, there's a differential between where they are chronologically and where they are developmentally. You use the developmental age to guide the supervision needs. Low stimulation environments. Kiddos with FASD, again, all very unique, but generally do not do particularly well when there is a lot of distractible temptation. They're because of those brain domains we talked about that are impacted, the ability to and provide executive function, the ability to focus attention, the ability to operate with strong working memory are very impacted. Low stimulation, low demand environments, and structure, consistency, and predictability, hugely important. Again, these are good for many kiddos, but particularly with our FASD, these are almost non-negotiables. We can alter our expectations, and this is a lot of what you've already heard about the age differential, the developmental age versus the chronological age. This little graphic here, I think is very helpful. So here's a kiddo who's actually 18 years old chronologically. His physical age is 18. In certain areas, he has much more strengths and may look or appear to be 20 years old in his expressive language. As I mentioned, often that expressive language is very developed. They're chatty young people and can communicate pretty effectively. But in other areas, for example, with this little example, his social skills are only equivalent to a 7 years old. His emotional maturity, a 6-year-old. His living or adaptive skills are around 11. So you can see there's many different aspects of those brain domains that are impacted and have very different presentations in his day-to-day. So as we think about what we expect, we start to really think about what can the child do rather than what they won't do. And we shift the focus from blaming to really supporting, to accommodating those needs. And again, consistent with that idea of supervision, we're thinking about goals that are about being interdependent with those around the child, those who are going to support, those systems that are going to support that child, as well as the individuals, not necessarily becoming independent certainly not on the same time frame or the same scale that our non-disabled peers are going to be. And then the other thing is how, and to be honest, when we use these strategies. It's really important to be on your game when you are parenting a child with an FASD, and that's hard to do. And we know this is uh, a demanding expectation to be constantly proactive, preventative, focusing on what could happen if we are not accommodating and being planful. We know that repeating, not only verbally, but the practicing those behaviors is going to be really, really important. Simple, slow, and consistent. You're hearing that consistent word again here. Directions, demands, uh, uh, the tasks being asked, the chore expectations, the academic work tasks, slow, simple, and consistent. Making sure that the child really does understand what the demand is. Again, good expressive language so they can often appear like oh, I'm nodding, I'm complying with a little bit of what you do. So you assume that I am on target, but they get frustrated when I don't finish that task or I don't finish it well, or it takes me 10 times longer than it takes my sibling to do that. So really thinking carefully about those expectations and focusing on the strengths and the positives wherever possible. Build on those things. So in the case of our kiddo on the previous slide that had really strong expressive language, that might be where we want to really front load the positives of things that we can build on and create opportunities where he can build on those strengths and those uh, capabilities that may need less support, but are really a positive for him, on which then we can then begin to build those more uh, the skills that need more support.
Helps to unmute. Apologies. What Kelly just shared there were sort of those general um, areas of support and strategies in modifying those three different areas. You can also look very specifically at each child about where they might need more supports based on the brain domains that have been most impacted for them. This work comes from Dr. Vanessa Spiller. She actually is out of Australia. She wrote this fantastic book, Explained by Brain. And she has come up with this idea of the ability wheel. And I love the metaphor she uses, this wheel, because if we think about a wheel, the more smooth it is, the more rounded it is, the easier it is to roll, right? And the bigger it is, the less effort you're going to need, right? Something that is smaller or something that isn't quite perfectly round is a little bit harder to get around. So what she's done is she's taken these brain areas and put them in this wheel for you to be able to map the child that you are parenting or the child that you're teaching, sort of map on here to see where their abilities are. And then along the sides, figuring, well, where are things that are sort of impaired or below average, and how do I then offer supports for those? So we've got an example of this, because I know this wheel looks a little bit confusing. But here's the first example, okay? You can see inside here, these red dots along here indicate a severe impairment. The orange dots outside that, below average. The green dots, average. The blue dots, above average, and the purple, exceptional. So you can look at each of these areas and say, okay, in terms of sensory, this little piece of the pie, that pretty average in our sensory domain, pretty average in our brain structure, motor skills. All of these things are looking pretty average. Then you get to attention and it's like, oh, that's a little bit below average. So we kind of dip down here a little bit. And again, with executive functioning. So this might be a profile of sort of your typical ADHD, right? Where we've got maybe some attention issues, maybe some executive functioning issues. But looking at this wheel, think, okay, how easily is this going to roll? And how much effort will be needed for rolling this wheel? You guys can chat that in or unmute. Oh, we got some chats here. Not too difficult to roll. Yep. Not too difficult. And there's a link that's not working, Kelly. I'm not sure which one that is. Is that Victoria? Is that for the slides? Maureen says some effort, but nothing spectacular, right? There's going to be some little bumpy, but for the most part, it's pretty smooth for us to kind of work with this child, get this child to do what we need. So then we have another person. Here's someone may or may not be modeled after one or both of my children, looking at sort of these brain areas. And with this example, you see, well, executive functioning, there's some severe impairments in executive functioning. We've got some severe impairments in that adaptive functioning brain domain. Sensory is below average. Brain structure's looking pretty average. Motor skills, really great. We've got really awesome motor skills. Academic performance is below average, but cognition, you can see, is sort of average. So we've got the ability, we're not actually able to perform. Language is pretty strong. What's interesting about language too, and when you really get into this mapping, language might be broken up and might be a little bit jagged, right? So we may have receptive language is a little bit lower, expressive language is a little bit higher, so you can get even more in the weeds with some of the abilities that fall in each of these brain domains. But looking at this wheel, where we've got kind of stuff all over the place, how easy is it going to be for this wheel to roll, and how much effort is going to be needed? Oh, not going to roll without excessive effort, support, and patience. Absolutely. Like this is going to be, when we're wanting this person to do, to perform in school, to do tasks at home, to be doing chores, this is going to be a much harder pull for us. And so this is what that FASD brain might look like. But what's nice about this ability wheel, and Vanessa, Dr. Spiller, you can, I think it's Jumpstart Psychology is her website. Yes, right up there, jumpstartpsychology.com. She's got a lot of these handouts for free download. So you can get a lot of those resources. And there's lots of great things that you can sort of map out and go through with your own child to see where you could, yeah, you may need to carry this wheel for a while. Yes, indeed. All right, so we're going to jump into a quick poll here. In what areas does your child or youth, the one you are parenting or perhaps one you are teaching, where do they struggle most? And you can choose up to 3 of these, and let's see kind of where the population falls here. So do they struggle most with adaptive executive functioning, memory, cognition? All right, those are coming in.
Yep, great responses. Um, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised with these responses. There are no options that no one is marking, so that tells us something.
We're
All
hitting
right,
everything.
there we go. So you can see that certain areas certainly are impacting more than half of adaptive and executive functioning, affect and emotional regulation, and then academic performance, with memory as a strong runner-up there. But all different uh, presentations of the needs, I think, certainly. So
Thank you for sharing.
we're gonna just offer a few strategies in each of in many of those areas. Um, And the first one we're going to start with is that adaptive functioning and executive functioning. And again, I will re-chat in the link to all of the slides and where the recording will be. So we are not going to go through each of these just for time's sake, but we're going to highlight 1 or 2 on each of the groupings. And so in this one, I want to point out that generally being, again, consistent and clear and predictable is hugely important. So strategies to help with that adaptive functioning and executive functioning build on that. And so one of the things we tend to do is we expect more of our kiddos than they're necessarily capable of at that moment. And so breaking a task that we would assume everybody should be able to do at age 7 or 10 or 15 into much smaller chunks. And sometimes this is called task analysis. And this is really a demand on us as the parent or the educator or the support personnel to really think through what is that task, what's the order of steps within that task, and really dissect it well, and then help the kid build those steps. Oftentimes we get very frustrated. We say, Billy, go clean your room. And then 15 minutes later, we're frustrated because when you go to look at what's happening, it's worse than it was to begin with, because they got distracted or they uh, got focused on something else, or they realized that they really wanted to be doing X rather than Y. And this is a really common experience. Really the need to break that down into very digestible pieces. And then visuals can sometimes assist that as you break that task down so that the child has something, as you can see there on the right-hand side. There's, a very get your backpack ready means do all six of these things, have all six of those things ready. And just because they do it once doesn't mean that they're going to do it the next time you ask them to do that task. So, again, adjusting the expectations. Our next area is um, Statia's
Yeah.
about affect and emotional regulation.
And I would just add to the breaking the tasks into small chunks. It also might mean sitting next to them and being a body double for them. That is something my kids need a lot of. So I can break down the cleaning of the room into smaller tasks, but if I am not sitting right there with them to guide each small task, each small chunk, it's not going to work. So body doubling is a really helpful thing for those executive functioning skills as well. So for affective and emotional regulation, a lot of these things are going to be pretty common to folks who have been in working with kids for a bit, right? Supervision, calm corner, these types of things. What I want to highlight here, though, is this idea of distraction, because this is one that we often forget, and it goes along with that developmental age rather than chronological. We often say think stage, not age. And so things for my 11-year-old, when she is starting to get whiny, really starting to have a strong, big emotional reactions, is to do something silly to make her laugh or distract her by something that I would have done when she was 3 that I would not think of to do when she's 11. But socially, emotionally, she's still more like a 3 or a 4-year-old. And so we have to think back, and those distraction pieces can really help with that emotional regulation, much more because that matches her developmental age than trying to talk her through something. But these idea of frequent breaks, incorporating movement, time ins, we learn this in foster adoption a lot. All you caregivers out there are probably very familiar with that rather than time outs.
And our next area is memory. And again, we're going to keep this short. There's so many good visuals and other suggestions here. And I see some folks have chatted some other visuals into the chat, and that's really appreciated. We learn so much from each other. Do not recreate the wheel when there are so many good things out there. And the internet has certainly been Pinterest is one of parents' best friends, is where you can adapt. Canva, again, another good source to find something that looks close to what you want and then make the adaptations that are necessary for your kiddo. So for memory, I think the one that I want to really focus on is the second to the last one, because we do have so many professionals here in the audience. Again, the assumptions about what a kid should be able to do by the time they're in 7th grade or 9th grade or 12th grade or whatever, is not a guiding factor when you're working with FASD. That's a quick entry into a lot of frustration and a lot of meltdowns. That information from school to family and back is hugely important, because even though the child has it written down somewhere or wrote it down at some point in their day, that does not mean that that information will end up at home in a way that's understandable to the parent or caregiver who's trying to assist. And so this is a time where we have to think, again, the stage. We are at a stage where we need to be making direct contact with the adult at school, and the adult at school needs to be making direct contact with the caregiver at home. The child is not the responsible party here. Now, maybe they will grow into that role, or we will develop strategies that will make that more likely. But it is absolutely, if we're focused on academic success, and if there's academic expectations coming home and critical information, do not rely on the child to make that, because again, everyone ends up frustrated, and relationships begin to break down, and the focus becomes less on helping and accommodating that child rather than sort of he said, she said. And that's a really common experience that we hear of amongst our families.
Strategies for language. I will just highlight this one here about not using slang or colloquialism. They tend to be very literal thinkers. And so when we use certain expressions, sometimes get lost on them. Sarcasm is not always understood. And so, we tend to think, uh, especially with older kids, teenagers, like, oh, they must, be getting what they're saying. But these kids really struggle and take that seriously. Like, did they mean that? I have so many examples of my kids and things that they have heard and misunderstood that really make things confusing for them, especially when you're trying to give them directions. One time my daughter was in school and she forgot to hand in her homework. And the teacher had asked over and over and over and over and over again, and she hadn't done it. And so it was the end of the day, and the teacher noticed that it wasn't in there. And she said, oh, well, by all means, please hand it in now. Of course, you can hand it in whenever, being like sarcastic. And I remember my daughter coming home and being like, I was so confused. Did that mean I could hand it in or I couldn't hand it in? Right. And so things, especially when you're giving directions, they're very literal thinkers. And so be very short, succinct with directions in particular.
Stacey, I am cognizant of the time. So I think
Yeah.
what I'm going to just say on this one and the next one is, again, because we may have education professionals or other professionals, support folks in the room that are working on the academics. It is really being very focused on what those core key skills are that are the most important to teach and think about the optimal time to provide that direct instruction. Direct instruction is extremely important for all kids, but very, very important for these kiddos. The earlier in the day when the child is more alert and has a higher chance of being focused on the sub steps and retaining that information and being able to practice that information is generally better. Let's go to the next one. Um, Again, really thinking about what is that core skill? What is it we really want that child to take away? Do we need them to do that with three small print pages of worksheets to get that skill? Or do we just need them to demonstrate it two or three times and then we will need to modify the tasks in the future to certainly reinforce that? But we want them to have that success so that they don't get frustrated and risk that dysregulation where then no learning is happening at all. So modification of the academic task, thinking very carefully about what our core and key goals are. And again, those should be reflected in individualized education programs and other programming that we can certainly talk about in other venues. But really targeting those core academic skills goals.
Some ideas for motor skills. One quick one that I was surprised to learn when my kiddos were little, with writing, because that was a very difficult task, is actually lying under a table, sticking the paper on taping it to the table and writing that way, doing lots of big, large arm movements to sort of help with that motor development, particularly around writing, because that can often be a huge struggle. Sensory, we are lucky enough, I guess, to live in a world today where there's lots of sensory supports that people are more and more aware of. But for caregivers, alternative options for high stimulation areas, like we have just had to learn that we have to say no to a big party, or we may have to exit early, or our family gatherings are going to have to look different. It's okay for our kid to have to walk away in the middle of a birthday party, and we're ready to go walk with them. So be thinking of doing things because we know it's going to be difficult. What supports can we put in place? And it's going to perhaps look different for them. Preparing them for new environments, even if it is something fun that we are going to do. I remember going to like a museum and my kids like had a gazillion questions, and I had to actually go onto the internet, find as many pictures as I could so they could get a sense of what it was going to look like. Even though they were super excited to do it, that comes with a lot of anxiety because of that unknown. And so preparing them for new environments as best we can.
And I'm just going to chat this link, and this is Stacey, do you want to just talk a little bit
Sure.
about the
So
sources?
a lot of the great FASD work actually comes out of Canada and Australia. And Jeff Noble is out of Canada. He has this FASD Success is his company, and he has put together this awesome book, Understanding Me. I've used this with my kids, filling it out and giving it to the teachers because it talks about strengths and challenges and it lets you identify those, but it also gives some background about FASD. So if it's something they're not familiar with, it adds that extra piece of information. He also has a great podcast. And I know we've talked a lot about the challenges, but I wanted to leave us on this note that these kids are amazing. They have got some incredible strengths. I have a child who's writing her own music right now and crafting things that you would never think of, right? And so I wanted to highlight this is one of his newest podcast episodes with Dr. Catherine Level. And she works at a developmental neuroimaging lab up in Canada. And they study FASD, and their big findings were that the person with a brain impacted by FASD is still growing through adulthood, but just at a different rate. And so the thing that we really have to keep in mind is the patience and the continual support and just changing those expectations, because there's so much amazing good things that are happening if we can kind of just sit in there with them and and continue to support even well beyond what we think we would need to. But there is absolutely growth that happens. So that's a great podcast and website to check out. We also have some additional web resources. We have a new FASD Virginia page we just talked about. The link is there, so y'all can check it out if you want to come back to that last session, and we are going to be highlighting that in particular. There's some books. I'm going to stop sharing here to see if we have questions in the last 2 minutes. We always have way more to say than we think we do, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.
And a reminder that we do appreciate your feedback. We have an evaluation